I would now like to introduce our next keynote segment. It's in your program. You have the biography on Linda Hasenfratz. And to introduce Linda is Nadia Theodore from the Canadian Consulate here in Atlanta.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nadia Theodore, Canada's Consul General to the Southeast USA, and it is a pleasure for me to be here at the 2018 Southern Automotive Conference with industry leaders from throughout the US South. Canadian automotive companies have also made major investments in the Southern United States, and Ontario-based Linamar is a case in point. Having recently launched a multi-million-dollar joint venture that will provide 350 North Carolina jobs. This significant investment marks Linamar's 4th North Carolina facility. Our close collaboration with the United States in the automotive sector has stood the test of time. We clearly have a good thing going. And during recent talks to modernize the North American Free Trade Agreement, it was also a good thing that we had industry leaders such as Linda Hasenfratz working behind the scenes and out in front with elected and business leaders to make sure that the new deal would support the North American automotive industry's continued growth. And so, as a former trade negotiator myself, I am particularly honored to introduce Linda Hasenfratz, this morning's speaker. Because we all have her bio, I'd like to take a different approach in my introduction. If I were to take a poll among the conference attendees and ask you for one word to describe Linda Hasenfratz, I expect, just like Family Feud, there would be many answers. Some would say corporate chairman. Others might proclaim free trade advocate. Students from Canadian Western University might say philanthropist. Her family would remind us with wife and mother. And here's the thing, everybody would be right. Linda Hasenfratz began her career as a machine operator. In her 16 years at the helm of Linamar, she has led her company through good times and bad. Today, Linamar has plants in 60 countries around the world, nearly 29,000 employees. And a lot of that growth happened under Linda's stellar leadership. In addition to running a global corporation, Linda also made time to serve on the Canada-United States Council for the Advancement of Women Entrepreneurs and Business Leaders, and Canada's NAFTA Advisory Panel. As you're all aware, leaders from Canada, Mexico, and the United States have now reached an agreement to modernize and strengthen the world's most successful trilateral agreement. This newly negotiated agreement bodes well for the North American automotive industry. It will help set our auto and auto parts manufacturers up to compete and succeed in a global market. And how we got there wasn't easy. As you prepare to hear from Linda, I'd just like to remind you that she was there on the conference calls and in the meetings to make sure that the automotive industry would emerge well-positioned for the future. She worked hard, and I hope you will join me in applauding her efforts. Please help me show her how we do it here in the South with a warm round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Hasenfratz.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today to give you a little bit of perspective from Linamar's viewpoint on the rapidly changing automotive industry. So first, just a little bit more about Linamar. Linamar is a diversified manufacturing company. About 70% of our business is in transportation. About 2/3 is automotive passenger car. We also do work in commercial vehicle, energy components, access equipment, like scissor lifts and boom lifts, and harvesting equipment. So we've diversified the company over the last several years. We make precision metallic components, machined components, as well as assembled. We do some forging, some casting, some fabrication in mainly the engine, transmission, driveline, and body areas of the vehicle. In the access market, we make scissor lifts, boom lifts, and telehandlers under the brand name Skyjack. And our agricultural business, MacDon, makes harvesting equipment and is a real technology leader in that field. Sales last year were $6.5 billion, and 2018 is shaping up to be another record year. We should be close to $8 billion in sales this year. 2018 will be our 8th consecutive year of double-digit top line and bottom line growth. So we're really excited about the opportunities that we have seen out there to grow our business. So let's turn to some of the challenges and opportunities. And it was interesting hearing the last speaker who was talking about a lot of the same things that we're seeing happening in the industry. I think the key point to make right now is we are certainly living in a time of uncertainty and a time of a lot of change, but I don't think that that's a bad thing. I actually think that uncertainty leads to opportunity with the right approach. So I love this Chinese proverb that water which is too pure has no fish. And really the idea there again is a little bit of uncertainty can be good because it can lead to some opportunity for all of us. So what makes me conclude that we're living in a time of change and uncertainty? Well, I think a lot of factors, some of which you already heard about this morning. First of all, the pace of change is really enormous, right? Things are happening so much faster today than they ever have before. Data availability is enormous and really transforming a lot of businesses. I think we're seeing disruptions coming from a lot of different directions, largely really from technology innovation, which again is happening very fast. I think that the whole digital economy is really bringing massive opportunities in terms of efficiency and the way that we can do things. And of course, politics is a real wild card today that we're all having to deal with. So just talking about that a little further, you know, our world has always been subject to change, but what I think is different today is really the pace of that change. You know, it took 75 years for the telephone to reach 50 million users, but, you know, 13 years for TV to reach that many people, 9 months for Twitter to get 50 million users, and only 19 days for Pokemon Go to hit 50 million users. So things are sure going quicker these days. I mentioned data availability and how that's really transforming every business, and that's happening for a couple of reasons. One, the advent of low-cost sensors, right, that we can put in all the products that we're making, that we can put in a whole variety of equipment to better track how we're doing things. And when you couple that with a massive increase in terms of computing power, what has happened is really an unprecedented amount of data availability. So, you know, a couple of facts around that. More data has been created in the past 2 years than in the entire previous history of the human race. By 2020, they say we're going to have 1.7 megabytes of new information created every second for every human being on the planet. In 5 years, 50 billion smart connected devices will exist in the world. And I think what's really interesting is at the moment, less than 0.5% of all that data is actually even being used, is being analyzed and used in any way. So I feel like we can really use this, all of us can use this data to drive better efficiency in our operations, improve obviously product design because we're getting more information about real life performance of our products. We can drive better predictability of equipment issues, tool life, and make all kinds of important improvements there. We can manage our assets better. We can create communication between these devices to optimize their performance as well. And like really, I think we don't even know the power of the data that we're collecting because so little is being analyzed. Disruption is happening all over the place, right? There's no shortage of disruptive technologies out there. Obviously, automation, advanced robotics, additive manufacturing or 3D printing, advanced materials, energy storage, genomics. Like there's just so much happening. But I think what's interesting is not just the number of different disruptions out there, but the escalating economic impact of those technologies. So like this chart is kind of interesting, you know, new technologies that were launched back in the 60s, like mainframe computers, were disruptive, of course, totally changed the way that we do things. But technologies being developed today have massively more economic impact and potential for economic disruption. And I think it's also important to realize that that disruption can come from unexpected sources, right? So Netflix disrupting video stores, Uber disrupting taxis, Google or Apple disrupting the automotive industry by thinking of differently, right, of what a product is and what they're selling and how they're going to sell it and how they're going to deliver that value. Digitization, digitalization, digital transformation, there's so many different words which are all a little bit differently defined, but basically I think reflect the same thing, and that's improving the efficiency of what we're doing, improving the efficiency of our business through the use of machines, right? Artificial intelligence, it's subset of machine learning and deep learning to really improve efficiencies. And of course, political uncertainties, tariffs, tensions are all creating a lot of noise, I think, and making it increasingly difficult for us to focus on our businesses. Thank goodness we've got one of those hurdles behind us this week with the successful conclusion of the negotiations for our new U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade agreement. So I'm really thrilled by that, as I'm sure you guys are. So I think the good news is we can succeed through these times of uncertainty, I think, by doing a few important things. First of all, I think we need to all be really flexible, right, and develop flexible strategies. I think that the flexibility of our strategies should directly correlate to the level of uncertainty to let us to be really nimble, right, and be able to pivot and turn and take advantage of whatever's out there to maximize success. I think we need to rely on strong cultures in companies. Like, for instance, Linamar, we're a very entrepreneurial company. We're very responsive. We've always been very innovative. So, you know, that culture of who we are really helps us to succeed. I think we need to stay focused and not let ourselves get distracted by, you know, every shiny object that floats past. I think it's tempting when we're surrounded by all these new technologies, but staying a little bit focused and trying to get things over the finish line is important. I think we need to think long term. We need to focus on fundamentals to drive our business and look past that noise of, you know, the political stuff that's going on, because that's happening today, right? Like, these tariffs are happening today, but they're not going to be there forever. They can't be. It's not economically feasible for that to be the case. So let's not let it distract us from what the right long-term decision makings should be. We got to keep innovating every day, and we need to look at the big picture, right, and really understand, kind of cradle to grave, what the right technologies are and what the right solutions are when we're making those important strategic decisions. Now, there's certainly no shortage of challenges in the automotive industry today. I think we're seeing an unprecedented level of change and uncertainty, and that's making it a challenge, right, for all of us to map out a strategy that's going to let us be successful, because we don't really know what's going to happen when, right? And there's lots of speculation about what's going to be happening, right? What's happening in terms of propulsion? How are vehicles going to be powered? Is it going to be internal combustion engines? Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be battery electric? Is it going to be fuel cell electric? Which I think, by the way, is a very interesting technology. Autonomy and the impact of that on drivers and volumes, ride sharing and the impact on that in terms of congestion, ride-hailing instead of ride ownership. What's that mean in terms of what vehicles need to look like and how they need to perform? So what we've tried to do is use sort of a balanced approach to these questions about what's going to happen in the future. We're trying to base our thinking around facts of what we know and try and also challenge the consensus a little bit, because I do think there's a lot of misinformation out there, sort of faulty logic and incorrect assumptions about the future. So for instance, the first assumption, and I read an article not long ago where somebody said we only use our cars 10% of the time, therefore in the future we're only going to need 10% of the vehicles because we're going to be automated and that's going to work. But really, I don't think that's going to work, because unless we see a big switch in terms of how we get around, right? If we want to move to like light rapid transit and different forms of getting from A to B, then yes, of course, that's going to have a big impact. But if we're traveling in cars, whether they're driven by drivers or they're driven in an automated sense, we still need to serve peak demand times, right? So, we need to look at, most people need to get to work or school between 7 and 9 a.m. So we need that many cars, right? So I think that we need to think about those sort of basic facts and common sense about what the impact is going to be on the number of vehicles. I think another assumption is that internal combustion vehicles are going to disappear really fast. Now, I do agree that we are shifting to new types of propulsion, but I do think it's going to take a little bit longer than some people are assuming. I think that there's huge investment and huge time that's required to retool vehicles into new types of propulsion. So the idea that this is going to happen overnight, I think, is unlikely. I think it'll take a little bit longer period of time before we really see major shifts in that regard. So these assumptions are all trying to answer some key questions about what's going to happen in the industry, right? Key questions like, how many vehicles are we going to be making, and how are they going to be propelled? What's the propulsion going to be? So I think to determine vehicle volumes, we need to take a few steps. First, as I talked about a moment ago, we need to understand peak demand, right? How many cars do we need to get people to work and school in peak periods? So that's where you start. From that, you take off the amount of ride sharing that you're going to see, right? So how many people are willing to share on their way to work? And there will be a demographic that wants to do that. I don't know that everybody's going to want to do that, so I think we need to, again, be realistic and practical about what's realistic around that and which demographics are going to do it. And finally, I think we need to think a little bit about untapped markets, right? Like, there's few technologies that have been developed that haven't created additional demand, right? Because untapped markets, maybe seniors or young people or disabled people who couldn't drive before, and now they can because they've got an automated car. So I think that's interesting. I just read a study by the Boston Consulting Group, I think it was released about a year ago, that suggested automated driving will ease congestion, but it actually might result in more cars on the road just sort of playing more nicely together. So the question of propulsion, what's going to happen? I think we need to think about a lot of factors here. Technology capability and readiness to meet consumer needs is definitely important. What's the range potential of different types of vehicles? How long does it take to charge or refuel? What's the cost? The cost is a big impact, right? Like in a battery electric vehicle, the cost of the battery pack for a large sedan is about between $10,000 and $12,000, plus the cost of the electric system. So actually the overall cost of the electric vehicle is between $5,000 and $7,000 more than its comparative internal combustion engine. It's why everybody's starting out with the luxury end of the spectrum, right? Because that end has more pricing flexibility to absorb that extra cost. So we really need to figure that out to make battery electric vehicles more available in the mass market, right, in the lower cost vehicles. Obviously, we need infrastructure readiness. and as I was mentioning earlier, the time frame and the investment dollars to get all that capacity in place. So electric vehicle sales last year in 2017 were about 1 million units globally, compared to a global capacity of 95 million. So again, it's going to take some time to shift that, And a lot of people are doing it, right? There's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of investment happening. But it's going to take a bit of time to do that. I think consumer readiness and interest in the types of vehicles that they buy is obviously key. It's one thing for all of us to think this is the right solution, and for our governments to think that, but the consumers are going to need to want to buy it and pay for it. So government regulations, however, and incentives are a bit of a wild card, right? Because they can really drive behavior and change. So this chart takes a look at forecasts for different types of propulsion over the next 15 years. The next sort of 5-8 years is based on IHS forecasts. And then the last 5-6 years is kind of a consensus forecast that we put together from 5 or 6 different sources. So first of all, the expectation is for global vehicle growth to continue, right, at maybe 1 to 2% globally per year over that 15-year time frame. Secondly, second point that you can see obviously is the pure internal combustion engine vehicles are going to decline. I mean, that makes sense. We know that. That's the orange bar. That's going to come down over time. We're going to see hybrid vehicles pick up in the interim to getting to electric, right? Whether it's battery electric or fuel cell electric. They're going to be sort of a bridging technology. So I think they'll increase and then they'll start to decrease as the electric vehicles start to take over. So the blue bar is the hybrids. And I think what's kind of interesting about this is if you look at, today, as I mentioned, we're making like 95 million vehicles a year. If we look at how many pure internal combustion, that's sitting somewhere around 90 million. And if you go out to 2030, if you add in, of course, a hybrid has an internal combustion engine in it, so the total number of vehicles with an internal combustion engine in them is expected to still be sitting at around 90 million. So that's why I'm saying technology is evolving, things are changing, but I think they're changing a little slower than most people are thinking. And I thought this was a really interesting quote from Roy O'Mara, who said, "We tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term," right? And I think that's really important because if we're making important strategic and investment decisions, you want to time it right. If you do something at the wrong time, the right thing at the wrong time, it's still wrong because you're too early or you're too late. So what I take from this is don't be complacent about the technologies that are coming down the pipe. Make sure you're ready. Get your business lined up, get your products lined up, and get your strategy in place. But make sure that you're again flexible and ready to move whichever way the market goes. I just want to reflect on another key assumption out there, which is that battery electric vehicles are going to save our planet. Now, unfortunately, this is also false unless we change the way that we generate electricity, right? That's a big problem because electric cars run off electricity, which is generated in most countries in the world, largely by coal-fired electricity plants. And this chart takes a look at the well-to-wheels emissions of different types of vehicles. So considering, right, the energy source, whether it's electricity or fuel. And I think it's kind of interesting that the well-to-wheels emissions of a battery electric vehicle are actually not dissimilar to that of a diesel engine. That can change, okay, because if we change how we make our electricity, it will change. So this doesn't have to be this way, but it just means some infrastructure changes. Also, I thought this was interesting. A recent Swedish study showed that the production of the battery pack for an electric vehicle is in itself highly emittive. They said that it generates 17.5 tons of CO2 in the production of a large pack, right, like you would have for large sedans. A typical internal combustion engine vehicle generates about 6 tons of CO2 per year. So that means about 3 years of emissions, before you're even out of the factory. So that's what I mean by looking at things kind of cradle to grave. Let's look at the big picture and really understand what's going on, because if we start trying to do this thinking that's going to happen and we inadvertently create an issue over here, we're not really solving problems. I think it's clear internal combustion engines are not good for the environment. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of moving to new types of propulsion, but I think we should understand what the right solution is. At the moment, I think we're way too focused on the battery electric vehicle, and that's just one little slice of this spectrum. Like this chart shows, all the things you need to think of, right? Getting those raw materials, producing, the different components, the use of the product, of course, and then the disposal of it. And again, battery electric vehicles could be the right answer, but only if we change the energy source. But maybe a better solution is fuel cell electric vehicles. Fuel cell electric vehicles run on clean hydrogen. Hydrogen vehicles can be truly zero emissions or close to it, given that hydrogen can be produced from water using solar technology. Hydrogen has a better density of energy as a fuel. It uses materials that aren't so much an issue in sourcing, like the cobalt and lithium of a battery pack, and it fuels as quickly as an internal combustion engine. So I think that's pretty interesting. And actually, it's starting to get a lot more attention. There's a lot more talk and articles being written about that. And many automakers, notably the Japanese, are really embracing this idea, and they're spending a lot of time and money on fuel cell electric vehicles, more than we've ever seen in the past. Just last point on this, there's a lot of focus on the automotive industry and as being a key way that we can reduce CO2 and reverse climate change. But I think it's important to recognize that only 6% of global emissions come from passenger cars, 9% overall from transportation. So we need to think about a lot more than just the vehicles. So what does this mean for strategy? What does it mean for automotive suppliers like ourselves, and how it's going to shape our strategy? For us, again, we find this this time of change and uncertainty as hugely opportunistic, because what we're seeing is our customers, your customers, have many different areas to invest at the moment, right? All these different types of propulsion, autonomy, mobility more broadly. They're investing in car sharing and other types of mobility. And what they're increasingly doing is deciding not to invest in what has been sort of the last area of the vehicle to be outsourced, which is the powertrain. Whether it be internal combustion, electric, hybrid, any of the above, what we're seeing is way more acceleration in terms of outsourcing in the powertrain area than we ever have before. Today, we estimate about 30% of the value of the powertrain is outsourced, and the balance of the work is in-house. But what's happening is, as we go into the future, we're going to see that 30% grow. And what's interesting about that is, even though the number of internal combustion engines is declining, as the percentage outsourced increases, we're actually seeing a growing addressable market in internal combustion engines, which is a little surprising, right? I think most people would be surprised by that. So, our addressable market today is somewhere around $125 billion for the products that we do. Just on internal combustion, that increases to like $175 billion by 2030. Then we layer onto that all the opportunity that we see on hybrids, on battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles, which offer some exciting opportunities for us. So our strategy in our transportation business has been, let's build a strong portfolio of product for every type of vehicle propulsion, whether it's internal combustion, electric, fuel cell electric, battery electric, or hybrid. And then we're truly agnostic as to what happens when, because we don't really know what's going to happen when. So let's make sure we've got a strong book of business and we can grow in any one of those markets. And we've done a great job of that, notably on the driveline side. So we've developed a whole suite of products on the driveline side for electric vehicles. Our gearboxes are going to be used at the moment. We've been sourced over 1 million gearboxes per year for electric vehicles by 2022-ish timeframe, at which point that chart that we looked at earlier is forecasting 4 or 5 million electric vehicles per year. So we've got a solid market share. In fact, we look at our content per vehicle in different types of propulsion. Again, we're trying to make these lines converge. And at the moment, our global content per vehicle by 2022 in electric vehicles is looking to be about $45 compared to our content on internal combustion, which is around 68, let's say, and our content on hybrid of 30. So again, we're trying to make those lines converge, and then if things happen faster, that's great. We're gonna be doing more in that particular market. So really, again, it's this idea of flexibility, right? Flexibility of strategy directly correlated to the level of uncertainty. Having sort of multiple strategies that are having a strategy that will, not multiple strategies, but a strategy that's going to really let you succeed in as many different outcomes and scenarios as possible. So don't bet on one future. Don't make a big bet that this is going to happen when there's so much uncertainty about what is going to happen, and instead develop a strategy that can let you be successful in a variety of areas. Be flexible in other ways, right? Keep your resources fluid. That means access to cash, right? So that you can jump on an opportunity when it comes up. Make sure your workforce is multi-skilled and flexible, and be ready for those opportunities when they come up. So in conclusion, I think that yes, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. There's a lot of technology evolution, a lot of new things that are happening. But nevertheless, I think times, in my opinion, in the automotive industry have never been more opportunistic. We're really excited about the opportunities we see out there. I think, again, if we stay flexible, we focus on that big picture, we focus on facts to drive our decisions, we look past the noise of the stuff that's going on right now that can be a little distracting, but look beyond it at kind of the big picture and the long term, and keep innovating, right, to stay competitive. And we can all find success in these uncertain times. So thanks very much for your attention. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and all the best to all of you. Thank you.